Oh, hello. When I was a little girl, I lived near a lake. It was clear and blue and shaped like an egg. Oh, it was full of all kinds of wonderful fish, but there was only one fish that people talked about. He was called Old Joe, and he was a catfish. He'd lived in the lake for many years and had never been caught. But that wasn't the most amazing part. People who had seen Old Joe swore that he had a big yellow diamond growing out of his head. Well, a real live diamond as big as a peach. Of course, everyone wanted to catch Old Joe to get the diamond, and so did I. And every day during my summer vacation, I took a little rowboat out onto the lake and put out 3 fishing lines. I caught a lot of fish, perch and bass and trout, but I never even saw a glimpse of Old Joe. Well, finally, on the very last day of summer, I gave it one more try. I stayed out all day, and I didn't get a single bite. Big black thunder clouds started to roll in, and so I decided to pull in my lines. And as I reeled in the last one, it suddenly went tight. A fish. It was a powerful one, and it took all my strength to pull it into the boat. And it was a big gray catfish. And he looked up at me, panting for breath, and I said, "Are you Old Joe?" "Yes," he said, "that's what they call me." Well, I looked at the top of his head, but there was no sign of a diamond. "Where's the yellow diamond on your head?" I asked. "Oh, I got in a fight last week with another catfish over a girl," he said, "and he bit it off." I sighed. "So I guess there's nothing special about you anymore." Well, he just stared at me like I was crazy and said, "Well, some people might think it's slightly interesting that I'm a talking catfish. Have you chatted with a lot of fish lately? I don't think so." Well, I saw his point and apologized for suggesting that he wasn't special. And we talked for a while, and he turned out to be kind of boring, complaining about his arthritis in his fins and how they don't make mud like they used to. But I was happy when it started to rain, as I had an excuse to go home. And as I tossed Old Joe back into the water, I thought, I'm glad most fish don't talk. Now, this is a story about a fish made entirely of gold and the incredible things that happen to the man who catches him. It's called The Golden Children by the Brothers Grimm. There was once a poor man and a poor woman who had nothing but a little cottage and who earned their bread by fishing and always lived from hand to mouth. But it came to pass one day when the man was sitting by the waterside and casting his net that he drew out a fish entirely of gold. And as he was looking at the fish, full of astonishment, it began to speak and said, "Hark you, fisherman, if you will throw me back again into the water, I will change your little hut into a splendid castle." And then the fisherman answered, "Well, of what use is a castle to me if I've nothing to eat?" The goldfish continued, "That shall be taken care of. There will be a cupboard in the castle in which when you open it, shall be dishes of the most delicate meats, and as many of them as you can desire." "Well, if that's true," said the man, "then I can well do you a favor." "Yes," said the fish. "There is, however, one condition, that you shall disclose to no one in the world, whosoever he may be, whence your good luck came from. If you speak but one single word, all will be over." Then the man threw back the wonderful fish back again into the water and went home. But where his hovel had formerly stood, now stood a great castle. He opened wide his eyes, entered, and saw his wife dressed in beautiful clothes, sitting in a splendid room, and she was quite delighted, and said, "Well, husband, how has all this come to pass? Well, it suits me very well." "Yes," said the man, "it suits me too, but I'm frightfully hungry. Just give me something to eat." "Well," said the wife, "but I've got nothing and don't know where to find anything in this new house." "There's no need of you knowing," said the man, "for I see yonder a great cupboard. Just unlock it." And when she opened it, there stood cakes and meat and fruit and wine, and it was quite a bright prospect. Then the woman cried joyfully, "Well, what more can you want, my dear?" And they sat down and ate and drank together. And when they had had enough, the woman said, "But husband, whence came all these riches?" "Alas," answered he, "do not question me about it, for I dare not tell you anything. If I disclose it to anyone, then all our good fortunes will fly." "Very good," said she. "If I am not to know anything, then I do not want to know anything." However, she was not in earnest, and she never rested day or night, and she goaded her husband until his impatience he revealed finally that all was owing to a wonderful golden fish which he had caught, and to which in return he had given its liberty. And as soon as the secret was out, the splendid castle with the cupboard immediately disappeared. They were once more in the former old fisherman's hut, and the old man was obliged to follow his trade and fish. But fortune would so have it that he once more drew out the fish. "Listen," said the fish, "if you will throw me back into the water again, I will once more give you the castle with the cupboard full of roast and boiled meats. Only be firm, for your life's sake. Don't reveal from whom you have it, or you will lose it all again." "I will take good care," answered the fisherman, and threw the fish back into the water. Now at home, everything was once more in its former magnificence, and the wife was overjoyed at their good fortune. But curiosity left her no peace, so that after a couple of days she began to ask again how it had come to pass, and how he had managed to secure it. The man kept silence for a short time, but at last she made him so angry that he broke out and betrayed the secret. In an instant the castle disappeared, and they were back again in their old hut. "Now you have got what you want," said he, "and we can gnaw at a bare bone again." "Oh," said the woman, "I had rather not have riches if I am not to know from whom they come, for then I have no peace." The man went back to fish, and after a while he chanced to draw out the goldfish for a third time. "Listen," said the fish, "I see very well that I am fated to fall into your hands. Take me home and cut me into 6 pieces. Give your wife 2 of them to eat, 2 to your horse, and bury 2 of them in the ground, and then they will bring you a blessing." The fisherman took the fish home with him and did as it had bidden him. It came to pass, however, that from the 2 pieces that were buried in the ground, 2 golden lilies sprang up, and that the horse had 2 golden foals, and the fisherman's wife bore 2 children who were made entirely of gold. The children grew up, and they became very tall and handsome, and the lilies and the horses grew likewise. And then they said, "Father, we want to mount our golden steeds and travel out into the world." But he answered sorrowfully, "Well, how shall I bear it if you go away? And I know not how it fares with you." And then they said, "The 2 golden lilies remain here. By them you can see how it is with us. If they are fresh, then we are in health, and if they are withered, we are ill, and if they perish, we are dead." And so they rode forth and came to an inn in which there were many people. And when they perceived the golden children, well, they began to laugh and jeer. And when one of them heard the mocking, he felt ashamed and would not go into the world, but turned back and went home again to his father. But the other rode forward and reached a great forest. And as he was about to enter it, the people said, "Well, it's not safe for you to ride through. The woods is full of robbers who would treat you badly. You will fare ill, and when they see that you are all of gold and your horse likewise, they will assuredly kill you." But he would not allow himself to be frightened, and said, "I must and will ride through it." And then he took bear skins and covered himself and his horse with them, so that the gold was no more to be seen. And he rode fearlessly into the forest. And when he had ridden onward a little, he heard a rustling in the bushes, and he heard voices speaking together. From one side came cries of, "There's one!" But from the other, "Let him go! 'Tis an idle fellow, as poor and bare as a church mouse. What should we gain from him?" So the gold child rode joyfully through the forest, and no evil befell him. And one day he entered a village wherein he saw a maiden who was so beautiful that he did not believe that any more beautiful thing than that existed in the world. And as such a mighty love took possession of him, he went up to her and said, I love thee with my whole heart. Wilt thou be my wife? He too pleased the maiden so much that she agreed and said, Yes, I will be thy wife, and be true to thee my whole life long. And then they were married, and just as they were in the greatest happiness, home came the father of the bride. And when he saw that his daughter's wedding was being celebrated, he was astonished and said, Where is the bridegroom? And they showed him the gold child, who, however, still wore his bear skins. And then the father said wrathfully, A vagabond shall never have my daughter, and was about to kill him. And then the bride begged as hard as she could and said, He is my husband, and I love him with all my heart, until at last he allowed himself to be appeased. Nevertheless, the idea never left his thoughts, and so the next morning he rose early, wishing to see whether his daughter's husband was a common ragged beggar. But when he peeped in, he saw a magnificent golden man in bed, and the cast-off bearskins were lying on the ground. And then he went back and thought, What a good thing it is that I restrained my anger. I should have committed a great crime. But the gold child dreamed that he rode out to hunt a splendid stag, and when he awoke in the morning, he said to his wife, I must go out hunting. She was uneasy, and begged him to stay there, and said, You might easily meet with a great misfortune. But he answered, I must and will go. And thereupon he got up and rode forth into the forest, and it was not long before a fine stag crossed his path exactly according to his dream. He aimed and was about to shoot it when the stag ran away. Well, he gave chase over hedges and ditches for the whole day without feeling tired, but in the evening the stag vanished from his sight, and when the gold child looked around him, he was standing before a little house, wherein was a witch. He knocked, and a little old woman came out and asked, What are you doing so late in the midst of the great forest? Well, have you not seen a stag? Yes, answered she. I know the stag well. And thereupon a little dog, which had come out of the house with her, barked at the man violently. Wilt thou be silent, thou odious toad? Said he, or I will shoot thee dead. Then the witch cried out in a passion, What? Will you slay my little dog? And immediately transformed him so that he lay like a stone. And his bride awaited him in vain, and thought, That which I so greatly dreaded, which lay so heavily on my heart, has come upon him. But at home, the other brother was standing by the gold lilies, when one of them suddenly drooped. Good heavens, said he, my brother has met with some great misfortune. I must to see if I can possibly rescue him. And then the father said, Oh, stay here. If I lose you also, what shall I do? But he answered, I must and will go forth. And then he mounted his golden horse and rode forth and entered the great forest where his brother lay turned to stone. The old witch came out of her house and called to him, wishing to entrap him as also, but he did not go near her, and said, I will shoot you if you will not bring my brother to life again. She touched the stone, though very unwillingly, with her forefinger, and he was immediately restored to his human shape. The two golden children rejoiced when they saw each other again, and they kissed and hugged each other, and rode away together out of the forest, the one home to his bride, and the other to his father. And the father then said, I knew well that you had rescued your brother, for the golden lily suddenly rose up and blossomed out again. And then they lived happily, and all prospered with them until their death. The end. Now, tell the truth. Isn't it a bit disgusting just sliding your hand under a kid's pillow and finding a tooth? Well, I know you're used to it, but I guess what I'm just saying is this what you want to do with the rest of your life? There's plenty of other jobs, in the fields of science or the arts. Well, I think you'd make a wonderful flight attendant because I've got to go. Bye-bye. Oh, hello. I don't know about you, but I have never enjoyed going to the doctor. So when I was 11 years old, I was scared to death when I found out that everyone in my class would have to go to the school nurse for a complete exam, from head to toe. The nurse would be poking, inspecting, and shining lights on parts of me that I'd never seen. Well, I finally came up with a very clever idea. I gave my friend Cindy $6 and a copy of Black Beauty to pretend to be me at the examination. Because you see, the nurse didn't know what I looked like, and Cindy went to a different school, and she didn't mind being naked, so it worked perfectly. I hid in the girls' restroom while the nurse examined every nook and cranny of Cindy like a detective examines a crime scene. The next morning, I was eating breakfast, feeling quite proud of myself for getting out of the exam, when there was a knock at the door. It was 2 men in surgical masks from the county hospital who informed my parents that I had been diagnosed with chickenpox and would have to be quarantined for the next 3 weeks. I tried to tell them it was a terrible mistake, but of course, no one believed me. I spent the next 3 weeks in bed, and I missed the spring carnival and a trip to Hawaii with my grandparents. And I learned a very important lesson. If you have a friend go to the nurse and pretend to be you, well, don't assume that those spots on her face are zits. Now, this is a story about a girl pretending to be somebody she's not and the incredible things that happen because of it. It's called The Goose Girl, and it's by the Brothers Grimm. There once lived an old queen whose husband had been dead for many years, and she had a beautiful daughter. When the princess grew up, she was promised in marriage to a prince who lived far away. When the time came for her to be married, and she had to depart for the distant kingdom, the old queen packed up for her many costly vessels and utensils of silver and gold, and trinkets also of gold and silver, and cups and jewels, and, in short, everything that belonged to a royal dowry, for she loved her child with all her heart. She likewise assigned to her a maid who was to ride with her and deliver her into the hands of the bridegroom. Each received a horse for the journey. The princess's horse was called Falada and could speak. When the hour of departure had come, the old mother went into her bedroom, took a small knife, and cut her finger with it until they bled. Then she held out a small white cloth and let 3 drops of blood fall into it. She gave them to her daughter, saying, "Take good care of these. They will be of service to you on your way." Thus they sorrowfully took leave of one another. The princess put the cloth into her bosom, mounted her horse, and set forth for her bridegroom. After they had ridden for a while, she felt a burning thirst, and said to her maid, "Dismount, and take my cup, which you have brought with you for me, and get me some water for the brook, for I would have a drink." "If you're thirsty," said the maid, "get off your horse yourself, and lie down near the water and drink. I won't be your servant." So, in her great thirst, the princess dismounted, bent down over the water in the brook, and drank, and she was not allowed to drink out of the golden cup. Then she said, "Oh, Lord," and the 3 drops of blood answered, "If your mother knew this, her heart would break in 2. But the king's daughter was humble. She said nothing and mounted her horse again. They rode some miles further. The day was warm, the sun beat down, and she again grew thirsty. When they came to a stream of water, she again called to her maid, "Dismount and give me some water in my golden cup," for she had long ago forgotten the girl's evil words. But the maid said still more haughtily, "If you want a drink, get it yourself. I won't be your servant." Then at her great thirst, the king's daughter dismounted, bent over the flowing water, wept, and said, "Oh, Lord." And the drops of blood again replied, "If your mother knew this, her heart would break in 2."
And she was thus drinking, leaning over the stream, the cloth with the 3 drops of blood fell from her bosom and floated away with the water, without her taking notice of it. So great were her concerns. However, the maid heard what happened, and she rejoiced to think that she now had power over the bride, for by losing the drops of blood, the princess had become weak and powerless. When she wanted to mount her horse again, the one that was called Falada, the maid said, "I belong on Falada, you belong on my nag," and the princess had to accept it. Then, with many harsh words, the maid ordered the princess to take off her own royal clothing and put on the maid's shabby clothes. And in the end, the princess had to swear under the open heaven that she would not say one word of this to anyone at the royal court. If she'd not taken the oath, she would have been killed on the spot. Falada saw everything and remembered it well. The maid now climbed onto Falada, and the true bride onto the bad horse, and thus they travelled onwards, until they finally arrived at the royal palace. There was great rejoicing over their arrival, and the prince ran ahead to meet them, then lifted the maid from her horse, thinking she was his bride. She was led upstairs, while the real princess was left standing below. Then the old king looked out of the window and saw her waiting in the courtyard, and noticed how fine and delicate and beautiful she was. So at once he went to the royal apartment and asked the bride about the girl she'd had with her, who was standing down below in the courtyard, and who she was. "I picked her up on my way for a companion. Give the girl some work to do so she won't stand by idly." However, the old king had no work for her, and knew of nothing else to say but, "I have a little boy who tends the geese. She can help him." The boy was called Little Conrad, and the true bride had to help him tend geese. Soon afterwards, the false bride said to the young king, "Dearest husband, I beg you to do me a favor." He answered, "I will do so gladly." "Then send for the knacker, and have the head of the horse which I rode here cut off, for it angered me on the way." In truth, she was afraid that the horse might tell how she had behaved toward the king's daughter. Thus, it happened that faithful Falada had to die. The real princess heard about this, and she secretly promised to pay the knacker a piece of gold if he would perform a small service for her. In the town, there was a large, dark gateway through which she had to pass with the geese each morning and evening. Would he be so good as to nail Falada's head beneath the gateway so that she might see him again and again? The knacker's helper promised to do that, and cut off the head and nailed it securely beneath the dark gateway. Early in the morning, when she and Conrad drove out their flock beneath this gateway, she said in passing, "Alas, Falada, hanging there." And then the head answered, "Alas, young queen passing by, if this your mother knew, her heart would break in two." Then they went still further out of town, driving their geese into the country. And when they came to the meadow, she sat down and unbound her hair, which was of pure gold. Conrad saw it, was delighted how it glistened, and wanted to pluck out a few hairs. Then she said, "Blow, wind, blow, take Conrad's hat and make him chase it until I have braided my hair and tied it up again." Then such a strong wind came up that it blew Conrad's hat across the fields, and he had to run after it. And when he came back, she was already finished combing and putting up her hair, so he could not get even one strand. So Conrad became angry and would not speak to her, and thus they tended the geese until evening, and even then they went home. The next morning, when they were driving the geese out through the dark gateway, the maiden said, "Alas, Falada, hanging there." Falada answered, "Alas, young queen passing by, if this your mother knew, her heart would break in two." She sat down again in the field and began combing out her hair. When Conrad ran up and tried to take hold of some of it, she quickly said, "Blow, wind, blow. Take Conrad's hat and make him chase it until I have braided my hair and tied it up again." Then the wind blew, taking the hat off his head and far away. Conrad had to run after it, and when he came back, she had already put up her hair and he could not get a single strand. Then they tended the geese until evening. That evening, after they had returned home, Conrad went to the old king and said, "I won't tend geese with that girl any longer." "Why not?" asked the old king. Oh, because she angers me all day long." Then the old king ordered him to tell what it was that she did to him. Conrad said, "In the morning, when we pass beneath the dark gateway with the flock, there's a horse's head on the wall, and she says to it, 'Alas, Falada hanging there,' and the head replies, 'Alas, young queen passing by, if this your mother knew, her heart would break in two.'" Then Conrad went on to tell what happened at the goose pasture and how he had to chase his hat. The old king ordered him to drive his flock out again the next day. As soon as morning came, he himself sat down behind the dark gateway and heard how the girl spoke with Falada's head. Then he followed her out into the country and hid himself in a thicket in the meadow. There he soon saw with his own eyes the goose girl and the goose boy bringing their flock, and how after a while she sat down and took down her hair, which glistened brightly. Soon she said, "Blow, wind, blow, take Conrad's hat and make him chase it, until I have braided my hair and tied it up again." Then came a blast of wind and carried off Conrad's hat, so that he had to run far away, while the maiden quietly went on combing and braiding her hair, all of which the king observed. Then, quite unseen, he went away. And when the goose girl came home in the evening, he called her aside and asked why she did all these things. "I'm not allowed to tell you, nor can I reveal my sorrows to any human being, for I have sworn under the open heaven not to do so, and if I had not so sworn, I would have been killed." He urged her and left her no peace, but he could get nothing from her, and finally he said, "If you will not tell me anything, then tell your sorrows to the iron stove there." And he went away. So she crept into the iron stove and began to cry sorrowfully. Pouring out her whole heart, she said, "Here I sit, abandoned by the whole world, although I am the daughter of a king. A false maid forced me to take off my royal clothes, and she's taken my place with my bridegroom. Now I have to do common work as a goose girl. If my mother knew this, her heart would break in two." The old king was standing outside listening by the stovepipe, and he heard what she said. Then he came back inside and asked her to come out of the stove. Then they dressed her in royal clothes, and it was marvelous how beautiful she was. The old king summoned his son and revealed to him that he had a false bride who was only a maid, but that the true one was standing there, the one who had been a goose girl. The young king rejoiced with all his heart when he saw her beauty and virtue. A great feast was made ready, to which all the people and all good friends were invited. At the head of the table sat the bridegroom with the king's daughter on one side of him, and the maid on the other. However, the maid was deceived, for she did not recognize the princess in her dazzling attire. After they had eaten and drunk and were in a good mood, the old king asked the maid as a riddle what a punishment a person should receive and deserved who had deceived her master in such and such manner, and then told the whole story, asking finally, "What sentence does such a person deserve?" The false bride said, "She deserves no better fate than to be stripped stark naked and put in a barrel that is studded inside with sharp nails. 2 white horses should be hitched to it, and they should drag her along through one street after another until she's dead." "You are the one," said the king, "and you have pronounced your own sentence. Thus it shall be done to you." After the sentence had been carried out, the young king married his true bride, and both of them ruled over their kingdom in peace and happiness.